Today is February 20th, 2018. I'm Renaya. And I'm Sammy. And I'm Sequoia. Now let's cut to the lecture breakfast menu. Today for lunch we're having sizzling chicken fajitas, cheese casserole, bento box, turkey pepperoni pizza, cheddar beans, sauteed bell peppers, Granny Smith apple, mango peach, applesauce, 1% low-fat white milk, hot chocolate. Tomorrow for breakfast we'll be having morning roll, kiwi, strawberry juice, diced mixed fruit cup, 1 low-fat white milk or chocolate.
In the midst of a crowd marches a little soldier, though she does not know it yet. You stand there, unable to express the fury pent up inside you. Anyway, there's no need. The screaming people swarming around you portray it well enough with their death threats. Her small figure is surrounded by 4 large white men. She is barely visible from where you stand, but nevertheless conspicuous, because all the rage of the crowd is hurtling towards her. Ruby Bridges was born in Tylertown, Mississippi, in 1954, the same year that Brown versus the Board of Education was decided. When she was 4 years old, she and her family moved to New Orleans, Louisiana. Her mother decided that she wanted Ruby to have a good education, and that going to a white school was the only way to get it. The test that Ruby took to gain admittance to the white school was designed to resist federal desegregation by making it so difficult that no black child would be able to pass. Ruby was one of only 6 black children in New Orleans to be deemed intelligent enough to go to a white school, and so became one of the first black children to desegregate in the South. Ruby was the only black child to attend William Frantz Elementary School. On her first day of kindergarten, she entered the school and watched as white families withdrew all of their children from the school. A large mob greeted her with threats as severe as poison every day, even though she was escorted by U.S. Marshals.
Every day they were there, and they were screaming and shouting. There were days when they would show up and they would have this box in their hand. The box was actually a coffin, and it was a baby's coffin, and they would put this black doll inside of it. So those days I remember being really afraid. I was frightened of the box, and I used to have nightmares about the box. You know, they would say, oh, we're going to hang her, we're going to poison her.
There was only one teacher at the school, Barbara Henry, who was willing to teach Ruby. The young girl was in a classroom by herself and suffered from the loneliness of being separated from the other children, even when some of them came back to school. Even when Mrs. Henry was finally able to have Ruby in a class with other students for some of the day, it was not the same.
I finally had an encounter with another little boy that was attending the school, and I remember trying to play with him and him looking at me and saying, I can't play with you. You know, my mom said not to play with you. And the minute he said that, it all sort of made sense. It was extremely lonely. That was I think the worst part about it. Being 6, not having any friends, whatever playing I did with Mrs. Henry in my classroom.
Ruby's courage showed the world how entrenched racism was. Her parents lost their jobs and she received death threats at only the age of 6. Even her sharecropper grandparents in Mississippi were turned off their land because of what she was doing. Everyone knew about it, and therefore she and her family suffered. Despite all the blatant racism she encountered, she kept going to school. In fact, she never missed a day. She gave people courage, and her perseverance paid off. The next year, her school was completely desegregated, along with many schools around the country. Although her bravery was forgotten for a time, she showed the strength and resilience of children and their power to change what always had been and what looked like it always would be. Ruby Bridges Hall, she is now married, did not stop working for equality and good education. As an adult, she was able to revisit her past by going to her old school to volunteer. Her nieces went there, and she was caring for them because her brother had been killed in drug-related violence. Created the Ruby Bridges Foundation, to combat the old problem that she had been fighting as a child which still survived, racism. It also addresses parents' non-involvement in their children's education. Now she and her old teacher Mrs. Henry travel the country telling their story and standing up against racism. She and her story have become a symbol for doing what is right even when it is tremendously difficult, and for fighting against the great inequalities that come out of racism. Ruby Bridges exposed how far-reaching racism was when she was persecuted for taking advantage of the right every American has to good schooling. Ruby made her voice heard even though she was a part of many groups that are severely underrepresented for the enormous roles that they have played in shaping America. African Americans, women, and children, to name a few. The people who are well known are often wealthy, white men, but they are not representative of all American history or of the American people. In the end, what is important is that Ruby Bridges is an American. The famous become famous because they changed the lives of everyday Americans in some way, but they owe their celebrity or notoriety to ordinary Americans who made it possible. Their impact will be null without seemingly ordinary Americans. Ruby Bridges has had a great impact on American history, not because she is famous, politically powerful, athletic, or astoundingly beautiful, but because she was an ordinary American who did what an ordinary American does in an extraordinary way: go to school to get a good education and do it faithfully. By being an ordinary American, she participated in the patchwork of ordinary American lives that truly makes up the history of the United States. Ruby Bridges brought the U.S. closer to justice through her extraordinary ordinary life, the essence of the American dream and the American experiment of equality for all.
Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1929. Faith was always an important part of daily life, as both his father and grandfather were Baptist ministers. He thrived at a segregated high school, graduating at 15, before heading off to Morehouse College. He then dedicated 3 years to theological study at Crozier Seminary in Pennsylvania. While earning his graduate degree at Boston University, he met Coretta Scott, who he would marry and have 4 children with. King and his family settled in Montgomery, Alabama, when he became the 20th pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. When Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to relinquish her seat to a white man on a Montgomery City bus in 1955, the incident lit a fire under the burgeoning civil rights movement.
His boycott of the bus system in Montgomery, Alabama was tremendously successful because he was incredibly strategic, and he worked with other people to get the individuals in Montgomery, Alabama to understand that they weren't going to take it anymore.
King's experience, passion for the cause, and position in the community gave him the credentials to become a leader in the 381-day boycott of the city buses. On December 20th, 1956, the Supreme Court ruled segregated buses to be unconstitutional. This was a major victory for the civil rights cause and proved King's nonviolent methods of protest could yield results. King was now the national face of the civil rights cause. He was jailed over 20 times, was once stabbed in the chest, his house was bombed, and he suffered relentless personal attacks on himself and his family. For a man of peaceful intentions, he unfortunately spent much of his life the target of violent intent, yet the threats never stopped him.
Dr. King inspired thousands of people through his eloquence and through his fearlessness, especially after his home was firebombed with his wife and his children. They showed through their courage that they were prepared to give their lives to the cause of freedom.
King worked tirelessly to promote the cause he so strongly believed in. And from 1957 through 1968, he traveled over 6 million miles, delivered 2,500 speeches, wrote 5 books, and dozens of articles. His hard work and ability to communicate earned him such respect that he earned the ear of President John F. Kennedy, who personally met with King. Of all the speeches King delivered, none has stood the test of time like his famous I Have a Dream speech. Symbolically delivered from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963, in front of 250,000 people, both black and white. King had become such a force in America that he was named Time Magazine's Man of the Year in 1963. A nice achievement indeed, but it paled in comparison when in 1964 he became the youngest man ever to win the Nobel Peace Prize.
Martin Luther King Jr. was an American. He was deeply American. And what's striking to me is that he had more confidence and faith in American democracy, in the Constitution, and in the principles of fairness and opportunity than nearly all of his critics.
While in Memphis to lead a protest march defending the rights of striking garbage workers in April of 1968, King delivered a rousing speech titled, "I've Been to the Mountaintop." It would be his last. Standing on the balcony of his second-floor room at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, King was shot and killed. In 1983, Ronald Reagan signed a proclamation declaring the third Monday of every January Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a public holiday to celebrate the man and what he stood for.
Back to school, let's get it, let's get it, let's get it. I tell all my kids, go rake it up, break it down.